What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about another positional coach the Detroit Lions hired this offseason. And today we're talking about the Lions defensive line coach, Todd Walsh. Man, these positional coaches get so overlooked. It's kind of frustrating. But it's so important to have these guys in history. We'll tell you that. We did a video on DoseOfDion, talked about him and the impact that he's going to have with the Detroit Lions. And I thought today we'd talk about this defensive line coach, man. I've been doing research on this guy for over a week now, and I feel like I'm finally ready to share with you some Todd Walsh. So let's get it started.
Way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, and we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down. And when we do, we're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to another video. Glad you guys are here. Now, before we get this video started, I do have a pretty big announcement that I want to share with you guys. I'm super pumped to announce this. Hopefully you're excited. And this is that Wednesday, tomorrow, on Last Second Dose, me and my man Rad are not only going to be doing our normal awesome show, we are also going to have a special guest. We are going to be having a current Detroit Lion on the show. We're going to have Detroit Lions' new cornerback, Jerry Jacobs out of Arkansas, on the show tomorrow, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Last Second Dose. So be here, all right? Be here to watch that. Check out. It's going to be awesome. And here's what I want to do. I'm going to put up a post in the community section after this video goes up. If it's not there, just give it a second. It may take a second before I put it up. But I'm going to put it in the community spot. And if you guys could go to the community, comment on that community post a question that you want us to ask for Jerry Jacobs. I will pick a few of those questions and ask them while we are doing the show. Okay, now I'm not going to pick all of them, unfortunately, but I will pick a few. So if there's someone's question, like it up, that way I see it, and I'll ask that to Jerry Jacobs. But make sure you're there. It's going to be awesome. If you do miss it, watch the replay. It's pretty cool. It's an awesome opportunity. I'm so happy that this is going to happen. I know me and Rad are both pumped, and it's pretty awesome that Jerry Jacobs will do this. So shout out to Jerry Jacobs, okay? He's going to be on the show tomorrow. So come in, check it out. But now let's talk about the Detroit Lions defensive line coach a little bit. And man, I've been doing so much research. I've been just so eager to share this video with you guys, but I didn't want to rush it, because if you rush it, then you don't get all the information that you want to give. And I think I'm finally ready to talk about some Todd Walsh. The Detroit Lions, I mean, they've been nationally recognized for the staff that they put together, from the offensive side to the defensive side. The Lions put an emphasis on putting together a really good staff. And in the words of Dan Campbell, and I love these words, he wasn't just going to go out there and hire friends or buddies because he liked them and he wanted to give them a position. He wanted guys that obviously he likes working with, but also that players like, and a lot of former players. But not only that, resume, they got results. They're like, here's what I've done. Take a look at that. And Dan Campbell's sit back and say, okay, you know how to do your job. I'm going to let you do your job. And that's what the Lions did this offseason. Dan Campbell's not an offensive coordinator. He's not a defensive coordinator. He's going to be terrible. He doesn't know the That doesn't matter, man. It doesn't. All right. None of that matters. If you have the right staff, that's all you need. All right. Dan Campbell is not going to be able to do everything anyways. His job is to manage this team, not call the plays, not call defensive plays. His job is to manage this staff. And what he had to do was bring together a staff that was successful, that had resumes that were very strong, that have had success in other places, and put them together. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's got to make sure that the locker room, that the culture is good. Everything's rolling well. You know, they keep the energy level up. They have good practices. He's got to focus on all that. But now that they brought in a really strong staff, we are getting recognized for that. And it's so important to have that. It's just not something to say that, oh, we have a good staff, congrats, it doesn't mean anything. It means a ton. Usually the best teams have a really good staff and they have consistency in their staff. And that's why it's tough to build when you keep restarting and firing head coaches and firing offense coordinators, defense coordinators, because you bring in new guys and things restart. It's tough to do that. So that's why hopefully the Detroit Lions can find some sustained success here with what they have going on. But I think if the Detroit Lions are going to turn certain positional groups around and get back on track, it's going to be the driving force of these coaches that they hired this offseason, because these guys that they brought in are all studs. All right, just as simple as that. We did the video on DoseOfDion. You guys seem to enjoy it. We talked about Staley and what he's done. See, one thing that every team must have is a team identity. All right, it's just as simple as that. Every successful NFL team needs a team identity. Not only do they need an identity, but that identity has to work. Okay, you can't say, hey, we're going to be a rushing team, we're going to play off the run, but we can't run the football. You're going to be in for a long season. You're going to have problems. Okay, your team identity is something that you invest invest in. But not only just in players, okay, not only just in trades and draft picks and, signings, not just that, it's also in the staff. The Lions hired Todd. That's exactly what they got. They got a guy that has a strong resume. He's done a lot of different things, but he's had tons of success working with defensive lines, putting guys in positions to be successful. And that's really been the whole idea of the Lions this offseason, to put guys in position to be successful. We'll get more into that in a second. But that's exactly what the Lions did here with the hiring of a guy like Todd Wash. Let me give you guys an example. All right. If I asked you this, from 2010 to 2017, what was the Lions' team identity defensively? All right, think of the Lions from 2010 to 2017. What do you think of when you think of that defense? Right, we had our peak in 2014. What do you think of? It's the defensive line. Of course, it's an easy one. It's the defensive line. You had Sue, you had Fairley, you had Averill, you had Jason Jones, you had Devin Taylor, you had all these guys. It was the defensive line. Ziggy Ansah, Kerry Hyder. I mean, it was the defensive line. That was the Lions team identity. And when it was at its peak in 2014, it was the most expensive defensive line in the National Football League. And there's honestly nothing wrong with having an expensive positional group. It just has to be successful. Well, you know what also happened in that time span? The Detroit Lions had the same defensive line coach. They had the same man, Chris, as their defensive line coach. Now, I'm struggling to say his last name, so I'm just going to say Chris. But he was our defensive line coach. So first off, he survived a regime change from Schwartz to Jim Caldwell, which is not easy to do on its own, but also because they stayed in a 4-3, probably made it a little bit either. But regardless, ended up leaving for Miami after that 2017 season, and I'm thinking a lot of that had to do because Patricia came in. Not necessarily to say that he didn't want to work for Patricia. I don't know if that's the case, but because there were not a 4-3 defense anymore, they were going to a 3-4. Such a big shift. Maybe that just wasn't going to work out. Patricia probably could have fired him anyways, and that's why it's always tough to have continuous turnover, because then things like that happen, and you can't find that consistency. And that's what we're hoping the Lions find here, is consistency, because the best teams have consistency. The best teams have similar coaching staffs year in and year out. They're going to have some up years, some down years, but for the most part, you know kind of what you're going to get. You think of teams like the Steelers, you think of the Patriots, you think of the Ravens, right? You know kind of what you're going to get year in and year out from those teams. To stack that position, you need to have depth, you got to have talent, but you also need the coaches behind it, and that is what doesn't get enough recognition. Players are going to come in, players are going to leave, but can you keep consistent success? Can you be a consistent positional group? Not always being one of the top ones, but can you find consistency there? And I have a great example to share with you. So in 2017, his final year with the Detroit Lions, Chris's final year as our defensive line coach, and into the year with Ziggy Ansah as one of their defensive ends. Now he had he was in and out with injuries throughout his career, but he was super talented when he was on the field. But then it was that left defensive end position, right? And that's where the Lions had Kerry Hyder. Now Kerry Hyder is one of those names that you haven't really heard about elsewhere, right? It's Kerry Hyder in Detroit. That's where you know him from. You don't really know him anywhere else. And that's also another really big sign of a positional coach doing things right. Have a guy on a team be successful in one spot, and then you don't really hear about him elsewhere. That's how you know a positional coach is really, truly getting the best out of his players. And Kerry Hyder was kind of one of those guys. Hyder was extremely good with the Detroit Lions. Isn't it also interesting that Kerry Hyder has found success with the San Francisco 49ers in 2020? Where our defensive line coach from 2010 to 2017 went? Great example. The Lions had an era with Ansah and Hyder as their defensive ends. But Hyder gets injured in the preseason. He's out for the entire season. But does that other side, the defensive end, just fall apart? Does our defensive line fall apart because we only have Ziggy Ansah now? No, that didn't happen at all. Chris was able to keep that defensive line unit afloat. Through the first 3 weeks of the 2017 season, without Kerry Hyder, the Detroit Lions had 3 defensive ends that rotated, 3 defensive ends that finished top 20 in pass rushing productivity through the first 3 weeks. Those 3 defensive ends included Washington, Jeremiah, and Anthony Zettel. All 3 of those defensive ends. Anthony Zettel is another example of this, of having his career really made in Detroit, because guess what? In 2017, Anthony Zettel finished with 6.5 sacks. Okay, this is a 6th round pick that finished with 6.5 sacks 2017. Guess what he's done since then? He's had 0 sacks. The guy hasn't recorded a sack since 2017 with the Detroit Lions, okay? So that's kind of what I mean. They had these guys never heard of. Jeremiah was a UDFA. Washington was a free agent pickup that the Detroit Lions made. He had those guys keeping the defensive end position afloat, all right? They finished that season top 10 in expected run defense. They finished with 95 quarterback hits, which would finish in the middle of the pack in the NFL, and they still were top 20 in sacks that season. Was it the top defensive line unit? No, because they had injuries, right? They didn't have the same talent. But did they keep afloat? Yes. And that's exactly what we dove into when we talked about Deuce Staley. He kept the running back position afloat. When they were going down to depth running backs, UDFAs, they were going to the practice squad. Did that running game fall apart? No, it did not. Was it as good as with the starters? No, but he kept it afloat. You're averaging 4.5 yards per carry with the UDFA. We'll take that. Perfect example of Deuce Staley doing the same thing. So we got an example for Chris, and we got an example for Deuce Staley. And Chris did this multiple guys. Think of some of these names for a second. Jason Jones. Now, not completely, because Jones did have some success elsewhere. Actually had some success with Todd Walsh, which we're going to get into. But Kerry Hyder, Devin Taylor, George Johnson, right? The guys that we just named, Anthony Zettel. I mean, those are names that you really don't hear about aside from when they were with the Detroit Lions, but they had success here. Go back when Scott Linehan was here with the Detroit Lions. Now, his strategy was basically, hey, Stafford, you're going to throw it 620 times a season. You're going to lead the league in passing attempts. It was an identity. That's what they did. They stacked up on receivers, quarterback passing the ball deep, and that was their offense. And it was like, okay, well, that's what we do. You just have to have a team identity. It doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to build through edge or defensive line. It could be through secondary. It could be through linebackers. You just have to have a way that you're going to build the team and the way that you're going to move forward. And I think the Lions showed us this offseason some of the insight on what that's going to be and what that's going to look like going forward. Starting off with the offense side of the ball, of course, the hirings of Anthony Lynn and Deuce Staley. See, not only did the Detroit Lions address the running back position, bringing in Jamar, bringing in Jamal, all right, and keeping Swift, of course, and addressing the offensive line, getting the top tackle in the draft. But they also went out and said, hey, let's go get offensive minds that have put together top rushing games. Let's not just get the players, because the players are going to change. But let's get guys that have built top rushing attacks. You talk about Anthony Lynn, one of the best run game minds in football. And then Deuce Staley, the background that he's had, asking out of his contract to join the Detroit Lions. The Lions made it clear, and they were serious about making this team successful at rushing the football. It was no longer just players. It was now, hey, we're going to address the staff. And I think the Lions have done that defensively as well. When you take a look at the addition of Dom Capers, we talked about the effect it could have over the scheme. Aaron Glenn, Dom Capers both have the 3-4, two-gapping background. We can expect that going forward. The Detroit Lions didn't go out and hire a defensive line coach that was someone that, hey, Aaron Glenn, I worked with him. You know, he was with the Saints. Let's just go hire him to get somebody that we know. Dan Campbell didn't say, let's go get my buddy up there from Miami. Let's just bring him in, let him do defensive line. Let's just let him try it out. No, they said, okay, look, defensive line, we ain't playing around, all right? If we're going to invest in this defensive line, how about we go get the defensive line coach that has been a head coach, that's been a defensive coordinator, that literally built Saxonville, okay? He built Saxonville, that came out of nowhere, was part of building the Legion of Boom. Now, what was awesome about this is that Todd Walsh has been a 4-3 defensive mind really his entire career. He had a statement back with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it didn't stay completely true, but he's like, look, we're going to run a 4-3 as long as I'm here. If that gets boring, you can have someone else run it. It was as simple as that. And now all of a sudden the Lions are running 3-4, but Todd Walsh is going to be here, and we'll get into why that's still going to be successful and why it's going to work, because he's going to have a lot of the same responsibilities for exactly what he asked of his defensive ends in a 4-3 defense. But that's what the Lions did. They weren't messing around with this whole defensive line thing. All right, they were going to say, hey, we're going to go invest in defensive line. We're going to trade for Brockers. We're going to draft back-to-back defensive linemen. But unfortunately, we're just going to hire a guy that, you know, we like because he's a funny dude. We're going to let him tell you that Trey Flowers is Romeo moved to outside linebacker. Why? Because that's what he does. He puts his defensive linemen in position to be successful. And I've read all the Jacksonville things about, oh, he doesn't put them in the right spots, and we'll address that. I can't say much about the secondary, all right, because that's not his background. He was a DC. Maybe he wasn't great at that, but that's okay. That's why Aaron Glenn is here. But who's going to hold down working with Trey, Romeo, playing the outside linebacker, but on those sub packages, getting on the defensive line? It's all about that guy, all right? The Lions hired a linebacker coach who works with outside linebackers, Kelvin Shepard. He's never coached before. He's a former player. It's cool. It's going to be great to have that former player there. But Todd Walsh was coming in like, hey, I've done this, all right? All right, let me just take control of this unit, and we're going to come out of nowhere. So you can invest because it's going to work out. And what happened when the Jacksonville Jaguars invested in the defensive line and Tom Coughlin didn't have everybody wanting out? Saxonville was born, a top defense in the league for multiple years in a row. And we're talking about a team that went to the AFC Championship with Blake Bortles. Yes, Blake Bortles, I said that correct. Blake Bortles had them in the AFC Championship game, okay? So if you don't like golf, we could have Blake Bortles instead. Just think about that for a second. They gave Blake Bortles a 3-year, $60+ million deal. So be happy we have Jared Goff. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you a couple of names on the screen. And we're going to kind of roll through some of these, not all of them. But I'm going to throw some names on the screen right now. Bop. All right. You're looking at this just saying, what the heck am I looking at? This is disgusting. Too many names, man. It's a lot of names. But what I'm showing you here is exactly what I just said with Chris. You remember those names? The Devin Taylors, the George Johnsons, okay? Your Anthony Zettels, your Cornelius Washington. Those names that you really haven't heard of outside of Detroit, okay? Those guys that he had stepping up, the guys that had their career years that made their careers in Detroit. Maybe they were just way better here than anywhere else. Maybe in their last leg. Maybe as rookies, he found success with them, put him in the right spots to be successful. Well, here's a list of names Todd Walsh did the same thing with in the multiple places that he's been. This is going back to his days with Tampa Bay, because it was really hard to do that, like North Dakota State. I couldn't really do this. But Tampa Bay, working all the way through his time as a defensive coordinator with the Jacksonville Jaguars in his final year in 2020, okay? Here's some names on the screen. I want to touch on a few of these just to kind of explain them. Not all of them, you can see them, right? You can kind of see, I mean, they're kind of hard, but if you pause it, maybe you can kind of try to read into these. But I want to mention a couple of names specifically here. Let's look at the second one from the top. Let's look at Styles G. White, all right? In 4 years he spent with Todd Walsh, the guy had 24 sacks and 111 combined tackles. That's pretty good. That's 6 sacks this season. You're thinking, okay, usually that earns a pretty solid payday somewhere. Okay, guess what? He joins the Minnesota Vikings after leaving Todd Walsh, and he's cut after a few weeks. They give him a few weeks and they cut him. That's it. They're like, hey, yeah, we can't work with this. They cut the guy. Then he joins the Virginia Destroyers for a year, and that's it for his NFL career. Is that not crazy? Scroll down a little bit more. Let's look at Clemens here. Now, Clemens is an interesting one. We'll talk about him again, I'm sure. But he's the guy that he spent time with Todd Walsh twice. In Jacksonville, old, 33 years old, but also with Seattle. And when he was with Seattle, Clemens had the best 2 seasons of his career. 11 sacks in 2011 and 11 and a half sacks 2012, which would be a career high. You can see the 91 combined tackles, 45 quarterback hits, 9 passes defended. All right, now next to that, it says dropped in coverage. You can see that by the 9 passes defended. Now, I wanted to address it because people will get worried. Okay, well, hold up. With Trey Flowers moving to outside linebacker, you have Romeo Cora moving to outside linebacker on base downs. How is this going to work if he was a 4-3 defensive mind? It makes sense to be a good question because 4-3 is much different from a 3-4. An outside linebacker at 4-3 is not the same as an outside linebacker in a 3-4. Well, here's how this is going to work, all right? Part of the reason. A guy like Clemens, now he played on the defensive line because he was in a 4-3, and Seattle ran a 4-3 with Pete Carroll with 3-4 players, so it was kind of weird. He asked him to do the same thing that I believe they're going to ask Trey Flowers and Romeo Okwara to do. What they asked of Clemens was to drop into coverage. Now, they didn't ask him to go cover man, all right? They didn't ask him to drop 10 yards down the field, and I don't think that's going to be what the Lions are going to ask of Trey Flowers and Romeo Okwara because they've done this with Yannick. They've done this with multiple players. But they asked him to drop back in zone blitzes, and they would ask him to drop back occasionally, sometimes into the flat to take away that first read. All right, that's all that they asked him to do, and that's what they're going to ask of Trey Flowers and Romeo Okwara. Listen to what Todd Walsh said when he discussed these two players. He didn't say, we need these guys to be able to cover, all right? He said they got to be serviceable in cover, but that's the third step. We want to make sure that we can get pressure in the base defense, but we got to stop the run. We want to build a wall on the inside. We want guys that can set the edge. It's about setting the edge and getting after the quarterback. Romeo and Trey can both do that. To me, moving in the outside linebacker will make Romeo even better against the run because he was too small to play that 3-4-2 gapping defensive end. So they had to address defensive line. That's why they brought in Levi, Aleem, and Brockers. That way they could push him to outside linebacker to put him in a position to be successful. And they're not just forcing him into the spot because if the Lions didn't feel like this was the best spot for him, then they wouldn't have drafted Aleem McNeil and Levi and traded for Brockers because why? You didn't have to. You could have done what Patricia did and just put him on defensive end in a 3-4. They may be undersized, but Patricia did it. He did it anyways. They could have just simply did that and moved on and said, hey, you know what? We'll just address the outside linebacker spot and get better pass rushers if we want to stay in a 3-4. But no, they said, hey, look, we feel like they're going to be even better playing outside linebacker. We know that they're studs. All right. The Detroit Lions currently have the 6th most money invested to that edge position because they just gave Romeo a big deal. They wanted, what they say when they re-signed Romeo? Pressure players. What did they say when they signed Charles Harris? Okay. They said, get after the quarterback. That's going to be the responsibility. Get after the quarterback and stop the run. When he talked about Trey Flowers, he said, look, I want to take away what he has to do and make it simpler so he can play faster. All right? They're not going to be asking these guys to drop deep into coverage. He just wants them to drop in his zone blitzes. Now, what's interesting about saying dropping in zone blitzes is that think back to Dom Capers. All right? He kind of put together and constructed that whole thing that they had going on there when it was with the Pittsburgh Steelers, where zone blitzing became very popular. He'd blitz out the zone, he'd get a lot of turnovers. They asked of Chris Clemens. Chris Clemens dropped back more in coverage than any defensive end in the NFL on zone blitzing plays. This is nothing new to Todd Walsh. He's not asking outside linebackers to do anything crazy. This is something that he's already been asking his players to do. Let me give you another example of a guy that also did this. Scroll down to the bottom. You can see at the bottom Yannick. All right, now Yannick was 246 pounds, so he wasn't the biggest guy. He told us that, hey, we're going to run a 4-3 as long as I'm here. That did change a little bit. He did work with Dom Capers, so that's why I think this will really tie in well, like I just stated. They worked together in 2019. Look at Yannick here. What he was able to do as a rookie, putting up 8.5 sacks, 14 quarterback hits. He was only 246, which is small even for a 4-3 defensive end. So what they asked Yannick, they said, look, we're not going to put your hand in the dirt because that's not what you're best at. We're going to let you play in your 2-point stance because that's what you're built for. All right? right? And we're going to ask you occasionally to drop into coverage. Nothing crazy. We just want you to drop into coverage. Do simple drops every once in a while, but your job is to set the edge and get to the quarterback. But we'll let you play in a 2-point stance. It's what the Lions are doing now. Well, Jaguars fans will go out there and scream top of the lungs, hey, this guy didn't adjust. He did the same thing. But that's just simply not true. It's not true. How about Josh Allen with the Jacksonville Jaguars? Josh Allen gets brought in, and what are people wondering? Oh, is he going to be an outside linebacker? I mean, he might drop into coverage. He was okay at that at college. And Todd Walsh's like, hold up, drop into coverage? That's a 15-sack guy. If he's dropping into coverage, we have a problem here. He's going to get on the line. He's going to get after the quarterback. And people are like, oh, I don't know if that's going to work. Guy has 10.5 sacks and goes to a Pro Bowl in his first season. No one's questioning that now. The guy was a beast in his first year. They just had to put him on a line and let him get after it because that's what worked best for him. Even though there were some questions about it, that's what he felt worked best. How about even Kayvon Chasen? Now, I didn't think he was, that great back in college. I didn't love that pick anyways. But for Kayvon, even their head coach, Doug Marrone, at the time said, hey, look, we'll let him play on 2-point stance on base downs. But then on those passing downs, he's going to put his hand in the dirt and he's going to after it. Now, unfortunately for him, his rookie season was a little bit less than maybe what people would have hoped. He wasn't on the field all the time. They also thought they were going to have Yannick, but like I said, it just became an absolute mess in Jacksonville, so he wasn't there. Like what the Lions, this is exactly what the Lions are doing right now. They said, hey, look, Troy and Romeo, you're not going to have your hands in dirt on early downs on those base sets. But when we want to get after it, when we go to our sub and nickel packages, you and Romeo, you're putting your hands in dirt, you're going to play defensive end like you're used to, you're going to pin your ears back and get after it. We're going to keep it simple for you guys. The only difference, and this should be better, this shouldn't be something to be concerned about, like, oh gosh, is this really going to work? Because if they didn't think this would work, they wouldn't have done this. It wouldn't have made sense to do this. Why would he even join here if he didn't feel like this was going to work? It wouldn't have made any sense. They believe that this is going to put them in the best position to be successful, and that's why you should be excited. And there's a ton of examples of this. Look at Bruce Irvin. Scroll up to the middle, right? Bruce Irvin. Now, Bruce Irvin was a rookie this season. He was only 250 pounds with Seattle. What did he do with Bruce Irvin? Now, Irvin didn't even play that much, but what he did was on those passing downs, he put him on the defensive line, said let him get after it. Guy goes for 8 sacks. He didn't top that mark until 2017. 19 quarterback hits. He didn't top that mark until 2016. All right. So 4 or 5 years, he couldn't even get to that number again. Calais Campbell, right? Calais Campbell was always a great player, but guess what? When he joined Todd Walsh, the guy went from like 8 sacks to 14.5. He was an all-pro player. He was the top run defender in the NFL. 30 quarterback hits. I mean, it's just disgusting. The year he left, that number dropped down to 4. He was there for 3 years. He went 14.5, 10.5, and I think it was 6.5. And the year after that went down to 4. Okay. The guy was just a stud, and he wasn't young either. He was over 30 years old doing this. The thing about that whole Bruce Irvin statement that I do want to point out was when I said they put him on a line and let him get after it, is that's what Bruce Irvin wanted to do. You know how we know this? We have evidence that this is what he wanted to do, because in 2018, Bruce Irvin went on Twitter and said this, not dropping into coverage. And he was like, oh, praise the... Not dropping into coverage. He was excited because he was basically told, hey, look, we're going to put you on the line. We're going to let you just rush the quarterback in 2018. All right. So like 6 years later, he was told that. And he's like, yes, I get to do this again. It's exactly what he had him doing in Seattle when he went for 8 sacks as a rookie. He was playing like 35% of the snaps. But he's like, hey, look, this is what you're good at. I'm just going to let you do what you're good at. Why people criticize what he did in secondary, stuff like that, I won't deny it. What he did with the defensive line and with these players, he did adjust to their strengths. He put them in the spots that he felt like they worked best. Todd Walsh said, we didn't have the personnel when I was with Jacksonville as a defense coordinator, because that was the time he was actually in charge of that. Otherwise, he was just a defensive line coach doing whatever the defense was doing, and he had to make it work. And that's what he was usually a part of. But when he said, hey, look, we didn't have the personnel to be a 3-4-2 gap team, now that they do, and that looks like what the Lions are going to go forward with, then they'll run that. However, if you want a guy that wants to mix in some one-gapping looks, there's literally nobody better than you could have for that, because that's all he's done. The 3-4 under front, where he shades his nose tackle Lee McNeil to the side. Nobody better to ask to do that, because that's what he did. That's his background, is getting after it. So if you're going to play a one-gap defense, you're going to mix that in. You have the right defensive line coach for that. Actually kind of touched on this a little bit when he talked about the Detroit Lions, saying, hey, Mac or Lee McNeil is very explosive for 327. Now, the Lions, they have this. He has the size to play nose tackle. They drafted him to play nose tackle, is what Brad Holmes said when they drafted him. He's the last nose tackle on the board. He's got the ability to play 2-gap, just like Levi does well, just like Michael Brockers does as well. But he also kind of went around and touched on how these guys could also play 1-gap. Levi's explosiveness, Aleem's explosiveness at his size. That's what you need to play a 1-gap defense. Here's schematically what I think he's going to bring to the table for the Detroit Lions, and which I think they will implement a lot next season in those base packages. So when you go to sub packages, we know Flowers, Romeo, they're going the defense line like they know. They're going to keep it simple, let them get after the quarterback. It works. But in those base packages, here's what I think we're going to see from the Lions a lot next season. And it's going to help against teams like the Vikings, the Titans, the Browns, teams like to run the football. But it's going to be showing a 50 front. Now, this is something that he did run with Jacksonville, was a 50 front a lot of time. 50 front, all that means is 5 guys along the line of scrimmage. Doesn't mean your hand has to be in the dirt, just means you have to be along the line of scrimmage. And what the Lions are doing with Romeo and Trey, asking them to play outside linebacker, but being a 2-point stance, is going to look very similar to a 50 front, because they're going to a lot of times be on the line of scrimmage. He's not going to be asking these guys to be 5 yards off the ball. He's going to ask them to get on the line of scrimmage, just being a 2-point stance. That way they can set the edge and they can get after the quarterback and they can drop a little bit into coverage if they need to, right, in certain situations. But that will be a 50 front, which basically a 50 front is like a 5-2 defense, because if you think about it, Trey and Romeo on the defensive line, and you would have your 2 linebackers, that's a 5-2 defense. And that's a great way to stop the run. That's how the teams started to slow down the Rams, because they were a run team, so they slowed down like that. That's how the Lions will slow teams down like the Vikings, that they've never been able to stop that run game. A 5-2 defense, that 50 front, is going to slow that down, because now you have tons of size, right? So with the drafting of Aleem, Brockers, Levi, it allows them to push these guys to the outside linebacker spot. Get more size, get more physical, stop the run. They are a team that knows they have to stop the run. Walsh said it himself. Well, look, we want to get after the quarterback, but if we can't stop the run, we can't do that. We have to earn those pass rushing opportunities. Romeo's going to be better in run defense. I guarantee you he'll be better as a run defender this season, playing outside linebacker. Trey will be great either way because he's Trey Flowers and he's good at it all. This 50 front is what's built to stop the run. You have a lot of big guys then on the defensive line up against the line of scrimmage, and it's going to be tough to run against that kind of size. You're talking like 1,500 pounds, 1,400 pounds on that defensive line, basically. Todd Walsh basically gave this away when he was talking about the Detroit Lions' new additions. When he said Aleem McNeil, when he was talking about Mac, he said this: Aleem McNeil will be our nose guard. Now that's important because nose guard is not the same thing as nose tackle. A nose guard does play the nose tackle position in a 3-4 base set. However, a nose guard is a nose tackle in a 5-2 front. So we basically just gave this away, that's what the Lions will be implementing. It's the subtle little notes. Only in base sets, and you're only in your base set about 40%, 30% of the time, because so many times you're in the nickel and sub. So don't get too concerned about the whole dropping the coverage thing, because he's just going to ask him to do it occasionally, a little bit. It's not going to be anything crazy, okay? If he didn't feel like this would work, this is not something that they would do, because like he said to Josh Allen, he ain't dropping the coverage. He's a 15-sack guy. All right, he's going to make this so their main job is to get after the quarterback and stop the run, specifically Romeo Okwara, because that's what he's the best at. All right, but they just want occasional drops, sit in flats, sit in those zones. That way you can run zone blitzes. If you guys saw from all those names, this guy knows how to develop some defensive linemen. He knows how to get the best out of them. He knows how to put them in positions to be successful, okay? These guys have praised him. If it wasn't for mismanagement, that Saxonville thing may not have come to an end, because it's not simply about the money. It's that players didn't want to be there, all right? That's why that thing came to a halting crash, and because they paid Nick Foles and they paid Blake Bortles big money, which did not work out at all. So it just kind of fell apart from the front office down, and luckily the Lions shouldn't have that issue because they didn't hire Tom Coughlin. All right, that was their issue, was their front office was a complete mess. 25% of the grievances in the NFL came from the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's a problem. Players wanted out. Jalen Ramsey wanted out. Yannick's like, I'm not signing another contract here. Wasn't because Walsh wasn't doing his job at a high level. He built Saxonville, but because the front office screwed it up, it didn't last, which honestly could be a good thing for us, because it didn't last. Now he's here in Detroit. Thank goodness, because this guy knows how to build a defense. Your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.
Great. I did good. You did great. Let's just go. Here's the good news.